Trump has just made a pretty significant post on Truth Social. I'm just going to read the whole thing. Based on the lack of respect that China has shown to the world markets, I am hereby raising the tariff charged to China by the United States to 125% effective immediately. At some point, hopefully in the near future, China will realize that the days of ripping off the USA and other countries is no longer sustainable or acceptable. Conversely, and based on the fact that more than 75 countries have called representatives of the United States, including Departments of Commerce, Treasury, and the USTR, to negotiate a solution to the subjects being discussed relative to trade barriers, tariffs, currency manipulation, and non-monetary tariffs, that those countries have not, at my strong suggestion, retaliated in any way, shape, or form against the United States. Here's a key line. I have authorized a 90-day pause and a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%, also effective immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Do you see, Ryan Nobles, the hand of any pressure of folks on the Hill where you are in this announcement?
Listen, Chris, there's definitely a lot of angst up here on Capitol Hill about the form and fashion in which these tariffs have been delivered. But we have seen Republicans at least publicly tell us that they're willing to give the president some time to see this through. But privately behind the scenes, we know that they are getting phone calls from constituents that are really worried about their 401ks. They're getting calls from constituents who own small businesses who are worried about the impacts of these tariffs. The volume of this concern just seems to be increasing by the day. So that message, we are told, is being relayed to the White House with a degree of urgency. And there was some expectation that this entire process was, had the opportunity to shift on a dime at any moment, which is, it appears it has in this regard. So, while Donald Trump has said that he was going to see this through long term, anything can change at any given moment. And as we see the markets reacting, I talked to one senator today who said that with as simple as a Truth Social post, Donald Trump could send the markets back into green territory. And that's exactly what we see happening here. That volatility, though, cuts both ways. And, we'll have to see how congressional Republicans feel about not having a very specific long-term strategy with an end game. That's what we continue to hear over and over from congressional Republicans. Mr. President, you have the ability and the right to see your economic vision forward, but you need to give us some guidance as to how you get to the end of this. How does this plane land? And a lot of the angst, I think, from congressional Republicans comes from that idea that they just seem to be shooting from the hip, and there's not a long-term strategy as to how to bring this all in to one specific strategy that is a long-term economic benefit to the United States, Chris.
Ryan Nobles, thank you. And take a look at the Dow, at least starting to respond all the way coming up already. I want to bring back in Neil Irwin, Chief Economic Correspondent for Axios, NBC Senior White House Correspondent Garrett Hake, and NBC Senior Business Correspondent Christine Romans. Talk about what we're seeing on the Dow and talk about this announcement by the president.
Well, that's a big move in the Dow. 6% in one move is a lot. We're back above 40,000. Remember, we were at 42,200 or so just a few days ago when this whole tariff tantrum started, when the president and the counterparties started firing back and forth each other. Look, this is the president saying in his Truth Social post that the 75 countries who came up to him and kissed his, as you know what he said yesterday, that he's going to give them a break for 90 days while they work through all of these things. China, though, he's really putting the screws to China and actually adding to the amount, the tariff amount on China. So talking about saying that China has showed a lack of respect to the world's market. So he's picking 75 countries they'll continue to work with. Clearly, Wall Street likes the sound of that. They don't love the trade war.
What do we, Garrett, to make of this decision by the president and the timing of it?
Well, look, it's an extraordinary reversal from the president, who's been saying for days he wouldn't do exactly this. But he's been facing a ton of pressure from both the markets and from Republicans to target these tariffs in a more structured way, in a way that they can defend. And I think this will give those elected Republicans exactly what they asked for. I think there's much more appetite on the Hill, as Ryan was alluding to have a more direct trade confrontation with China, who Secretary Bessent was saying even this morning is the worst offender when it comes to unfair trade practices. But to let some of these other countries, many of whom we have trade treaties with or trade deals with, or including some negotiated by President Trump, essentially off the hook, and to not have a global trade war on all fronts at all times with allies and adversaries alike. Clearly the market likes it. Congressional Republicans, even I think some congressional Democrats will probably applaud this. They see China as kind of a global trade cheater in some ways too. So focusing more narrowly on that, I think, will be perceived as a victory. But the president, had been very clear that, he wasn't going to take this kind of step. Remember, the big picture reasoning for these tariffs is to reshore manufacturing from all over the globe to essentially rebuild America's industrial base. I'm not sure that targeting just China and a 90-day pause will do that. And it certainly adds to the question of uncertainty that has roiled the markets and political leaders around the world. If the president has said for the last week that he wouldn't engage in a move quite like this, then he does so in the middle of the afternoon on a Wednesday. What will he do on Thursday or Friday or after the markets close, right? So a huge market move from a social media post. We do, by the way, think it's likely we will see and hear from the president in the next hour or so. He is on his schedule signing some executive orders this afternoon. He's also meeting with NASCAR champions, or racing car champions, I think not just NASCAR, a visual event that will be ripe for pun and analogy as we see the stock market really begin to take off here. But I think we'll hear from the president more fulsomely on the decision-making behind this move today, hopefully within the next hour. Again, while the markets are still open, something the investors may well enjoy as well.
Christine, I'm told you have to run, but you wanted to make a point about this 10%
I'm
effective.
looking at the end. I've authorized a 90-day pause. That's what Wall Street really, really loves here, is the pause there. And a substantially lowered reciprocal tariff during this period of 10%. Remember, there was all of that discussion about just how they figured out 46% for one country, 43 for another, 20 this and that. And there were a lot of questions about the formula, just how exactly they got to that. It looks like they're lowering all of those to 10% for right now. So it's that same reciprocal tariff, and then going through from there, they'll do the negotiations.
Well, thank you for that. Neil, let me ask you for your take on this. And I think it's worth pointing out, we don't know, and maybe we'll hear from the president later today about why he decided to make this decision. He at least says at the top of this that he's been getting a lot of calls from people talking about, different things. He had sort of hinted at that yesterday, and last night talked about getting his arse kicked. But also, the S&P 500 was nearing a bear market. There was all the political pressure. How do you view this statement from the president?
Yeah, look, it's obviously a relief rally for markets. There's, a lot of relief if you're an importer who are looking at 46% from Vietnam or some of these numbers in the near future. That said, look, first of all, keeping the 10% baseline reciprocal tariff in place for the entire world, that's 4 times what the pre-January tariff level was on average. So that's still a very large tariff relative to modern U.S. experience. And 100 and whatever percent we're on now for China. Look, China is a major trade partner. We get a ton of imports from China, a ton of consumer goods. That's going to bite if that stays in place. And then you get to the negotiations. All right, so we're doing a 90-day pause to negotiate with these 50 or 75 countries that want to come to the table to make a deal. How does that actually work? That's a lot of different countries. The U.S. has not laid out specific asks. Remember, they did this kind of crude arithmetic, this crude formula to come up with the reciprocal tariffs to begin with. So it's not like we have a list of, we want this on non-tariff barriers, this tax on this or that. There's not a specific list that the U.S. is starting with to negotiate from. So how any kind of productive negotiations happen in the next 90 days with all these different countries at once, I'm a little skeptical of. That said, for good reason, there's a big relief rally on Wall Street right now, because the worst outcomes of everything getting more expensive all at once seems to be off the table for at least 90 days.